Alright, not all of these RPG horror stories are going to be so horrific. My players were in a village that was overrun by demons. They were frantically running from one building to another, trying to avoid being seen by the flying patrols. They entered an abandoned house full of wrecked furniture. A player asked, "What's in the house? Anything we can use or anywhere we can hide?" I attempt to describe the house. The words that somehow escaped my lips were, "The house is full of, basic stuff." Like I said, not horrible, just relatable. Your house full of basic stuff meets my basic, normal-looking human guy. We all have those moments, eventually. This is a long one. Also spoilers for Ghosts of Saltmarsh. I've been listening to some of the stories on this sub for a few weeks now, and I thought I'd share my recent experience with a toxic a-hole. For some backstory, myself and my regular D&D 5th edition group split up a few months back. Two of them moved, one quit playing, and the other three, including myself, wanted to keep on going. We always played in real life, so we wanted to find local people, which led us to a Facebook group where we meet some people looking to start a new campaign. Since I'm not on Facebook, it was my two friends who first played with these guys, and they told me it was fun. They asked me if I wanted to join, so I did. For context, here is the cast of characters. Myself, playing a ASMR Forged Cleric, Warlock, played by my brother-in-law, good friend, and someone I've played with for years, Wizard, brother-in-law's co-worker, friend of mine, and part of our D&D group for years as well, DM, new guy we met, he's pretty cool, Sorcerer. This story's toxic douchebag, but pretty cool when we first met. Rogue, Sorcerer's shy friend who didn't talk much, but he was okay. Side note, 2 sessions in, we had a TPK, so our first characters were not the same classes as what I'll refer to everyone as. Right off the bat, Warlock warned me that we had to play at Sorcerer's house since he is immunocompromised, and his house is 30 minutes north of where we live. We thought, that's fine, plus everyone is vaccinated, so no big deal. On top of that, he warned me that Sorcerer has been known to go off weird tangents or strange stories about his life in the middle of the game. Annoying, sure, but not deal-breaking. Since I live nearby Warlock, we usually meet at his place for a beer, talk for a bit, then carpool to Sorcerer's place. The campaign we are running is Ghosts of Saltmarsh, which is interesting because I haven't played a module since I first started playing 5th edition. I gotten spoiled for so many years because Warlock and Wizard are really good DMs, and they mostly created awesome homebrews for us. So my first session there, I met everyone, and it goes pretty well with a few exceptions. First thing I notice is that Sorcerer's house is disgusting. Dishes are piled up in the kitchen sink, boxes of crap are everywhere and make it hard to navigate, and the bathroom litter box right next to the toilet hasn't been cleaned in days. I felt especially bad for Warlock, my friend, since he has a pretty bad allergy to cats. FYI, cats shed dander just like humans do, and when you don't clean your house, it has a tendency to build up. It got so bad for him they had to take an antihistamine once before the drive up and again halfway through the session. Second thing I noticed is that Sorcerer has a lot of D&D related things. Ziploc bags filled with minis, a gumball machine filled with D20s, a cool ship schematic made from wood that he laser engraved himself. For some context, Sorcerer and his friend Rogue were in their 50s/60s. Myself and my friends are in our 30s, and our DM is in his late 20s. This guy, Sorcerer, has been playing D&D before the rest of us were even born, which sounds awesome. Unfortunately, just because you have more stuff doesn't make you better at the game. Lastly, for someone who has played for so long, it really seemed like Sorcerer didn't know what he was doing. He would constantly do things that made the rest of us scratch our heads. He'd constantly be like, "I throw my dagger at the enemy!" I don't know why he was so fascinated with throwing daggers at people. You're a sorcerer, use your cantrips if you don't want to waste spell slots. Then he'd stare at his character sheet for a few minutes, thinking his turn had bonus actions. Spoiler, he didn't have any bonus actions, but that didn't stop him from wasting time on every single one of his turns. During the second session, we had cleared out the haunted house, which was just a smuggler's safe house. As we were gathering up items, the smuggler's ship arrived just offshore. We devised a plan to take the ship and kill its crew, which goes off well at first. All the crew on the top deck are easily slain by us without alerting the lower decks thanks to the heavy rain coming down. So we get a little cocky and Warlock, my buddy, decides to shout to the lower deck, "We are under attack!" To cut a long session short, with the help of some questionable strategy and a lot of very unlucky rolls later, we all die, and our bodies are thrown into the ocean. Rogue couldn't make it to the session, so the DM ruled that he was able to escape. It was frustrating, but we didn't want to give up on the campaign, so we decided that we'll be back next week with new characters. Inspired by his screw-up, Warlock wanted to roll with the bad decisions character type and rolled up his current character, a half-dwarf, half-minotaur as we like to call it, pirate captain named Captain Hindsight, an impulsive hexblade warlock who made questionable calls and then said, maybe we shouldn't have done that. Eccentric maybe, but our group likes to have fun and come up with creative and weird characters. Wizard friend collaborates with him and comes up with a halfling divination wizard named Finn Foresight, the main strategist, Captain's right-hand man, and someone who tries and fails to steer Captain Hindsight in the right direction. I decided that we need a dedicated healer, so I shoot for a wise, stoic cleric that will add some desperately needed insight to this party. He may be a pirate, but he's the party's moral center and has a heart of gold. At the next session, we find out that the sorcerer didn't die, but was saved last minute by a goddess of the sea. In exchange for saving his life, he would devote himself to her and gain his 3rd level in Warlock. Our new characters meet up with Rogue and Sorcerer, they tell us what happened, and we tell them that we will help them get revenge. We tell them that we need a new boat anyway, since the last boat we had sunk after Warlock failed to go around the rocky outcrop in the water. It is around this time that I start to see a noticeable change in Sorcerer's behavior, both during the game and outside of it. Outside of the game, he was super generous to everyone. He would give us snacks or candy when we played, offered to give us multiples of minis he didn't want anymore, and even food from his pantry he couldn't eat because of his new diet. However, in the game, he started to act more brash towards us. He began to rudely question any and all strategies that were not his. On top of that, he got irrationally selfish when it came to the items we found. After we got ambushed by some frog people and killed them, we found this really nice +1 spear. Perfect match for the Hexblade Warlock with the polearm master feat, right? Nope. First thing the sorcerer said was, "I want that spear. It's mine." I glanced at Warlock like, is he serious? I was confused. We were all confused. We then had to convince him that the spear was wasted on him. "But what happens if I get cornered by an enemy? That's how I died last time," he said. It was like arguing with a child. His strength score was crap, so his plus to hit wasn't very good. Plus, he was squishy as hell. Why would you want to attack with it in the first place when you have decent cantrips? "But I'm part warlock now. I have proficiency in simple weapons." Never mind, the hexblade right next to you that's built for melee has polearm master and knows how to actually play as his class correctly. After some time, he eventually comes around and gives up on trying to take the spear. Believe me when I tell you, we went through the same argument any time we would loot any bodies. With every session that went by, it seemed like he became more of an asshole. He started acting like someone you'd find on r/I am the main character. He chimed in all the time to give his 2 cents, even if his character wasn't in the room. Speaking of which, he didn't seem to have a discernible character to speak of. Him and his friend Rogue didn't play around with any accents, underlying personality traits, or anything to differentiate themselves from the persona they were playing as. I know that you don't need your character to walk around with a Cockney accent to make them stand out, but if you talk in your normal voice without changing any cadence, inflection, or tone, then it's really hard to tell who is speaking at the table. Things like that ended up making his questioning of Warlock's plan seem way more personal than it needed to be. Myself and Wizard were his trusted advisors, so we knew how to approach him with things like, "Captain, I believe this course of action would be more advantageous." For Sorcerer, it all boiled down to, "Your plan is dumb, but my plan is better." We genuinely couldn't tell if it was him or his character that we should call the asshole. On the car ride home after one session, myself and Warlock got into kind of a heated argument about how we should go about dealing with Sorcerer going forward. We did agree that his behavior was getting aggravating, so Warlock decided to talk to the DM about the problems we had. DM called him up to have a discussion about some of our concerns, and we thought he would have the self-awareness to realize he was being kind of a dick. But if you think he was an ass before, then just wait, it gets worse. This guy started to become the archetype of the quintessential that guy. One thing he always did that annoyed me was being the backseat player, constantly telling me, "No, you shouldn't do this," or "Are you sure that's a good idea?" This one session, we were tasked with earning the trust of some lizard folk in a nearby settlement. They wanted us to go kill a giant crocodile that was terrorizing their swamp. During the fight, Warlock cast Hex on him, making him take extra damage and giving him disadvantage on all athletics checks. Seeing this as an opportunity, I leap onto the croc's snout and try to grapple him. My character is hands down the strongest one in the party with an 18 in strength and proficiency in athletics from being my first level in Fighter. Now he's grappled for a few turns and cannot do his bite attack to grapple anyone else. Of course, Sorcerer just scoffs at this move and tells me, "Why didn't you just hit him?" Gee, I don't know, maybe because it sounds like fun, badass thing to do that burned one of his attacks and distracted him so you guys can attack him? Plus, I'm not gonna pass up an opportunity to go gator wrestling. I swear, whenever it was my turn, I could hear his eyes rolling across the table. Dude sucked at playing his character, yet always chastised me on how I played mine. We eventually tracked down the ships the party died on to the port nearby. After we got done with some business with the Salt Marsh Council and a group of lizard folk, we set sail in a small clipper ship that the council let us rent. The vessel we are looking for worked for a mysterious smuggler that Saltmarsh wants us to get rid of. Not only that, but this ship was behind schedule and their boss wasn't happy. The plan was to imitate another smuggler crew working for this boss and split their crew up onto both ships to deal with. We got to port, and Sorcerer of course wants to go with us. Keep in mind, this captain is the same guy that killed our previous characters, and would definitely recognize the Sorcerer who was in the last party. Myself, Wizard, and Warlock find this captain drunk and pass out in a nearby tavern. We deceive him into believing we were sent by his boss, and that plans have changed. We get half the crew to split up between both ships, successfully, then sail off together. The idea was to separate them so we could either bribe them to mutiny or thin the herd out a little bit, if need be. Turns out, I got stuck on the smaller ship with Sorcerer and Rogue. Sorcerer insisted that he would be the one to convince them to switch sides since he had the higher charisma. Dude seriously would just go up to one of the crew members when they were by themselves and say, "Hey, we are planning on taking over your ship. You can either join us and get paid or you die. Your choice." This is the classic my stats speak for themselves type of player you might encounter. Someone who has no idea what they are doing but believes their character is good at it because some numbers in a box said so. I don't care if you rolled nat 20 plus 7 to persuasion. You can't just go up to a stranger and demand he join your side for no reason. This plan, it didn't go so well. We were talking to 3 of them on the lower deck and they decided to attack us for talking about mutiny against their captain. I knew that the ship we were trying to steal still needed a large crew to man. Killing off the crew seemed cruel, and I thought that if I showed some of them mercy, a few might join us. After I downed one of them, I gave them a healing potion to show some goodwill. I tried to convince them that this won't end well for them, but I fail in persuasion. They then attack Sorcerer, who stares daggers right at me the entire time. He mopes and complains that I let him take damage. "You better heal me when it's your turn," he said. He only took 8 damage the entire fight and blamed me for the whole thing going south. "We wouldn't be here if we followed my plan and killed them while they were still sleeping." So their crew on our ship shout out that they are under attack. Wizard and Warlock on the other ship see that their plan failed, and Warlock decides to challenge their captain to a duel. The enemy captain puts up his first mate as his champion, the nasty barbarian that ended up killing a few of our previous characters. Warlock actually kills him and takes over control of the ship, so task failed successfully, I guess. Unfortunately, Sorcerer then tries to create a running joke that I'm conspiring to have everyone at the table killed because he took a little bit of damage. Every time we would run into some enemies, he'd smugly say, "You gonna, attack them this time?" Or, "You're not on their side, are you?" So remember when I talked about my friends and I wanting to have fun? Well, we take not being serious very seriously. We do strictly adhere to the rules, but the rules also say to have fun. And if we weren't having fun, then what's the point? Because we've known each other for so long, we like to crack jokes and get ridiculous with the situations we're playing. Sometimes our dark humor comes out, and we had gotten pretty comfortable with this new group. None of our jokes were racist, sexist, or bigoted, but they weren't necessarily for everyone, and they were mostly aimed at each of us. On top of that, we never made it personally offensive and always knew where to draw the line. Well, clearly, Sorcerer couldn't read the room because he tried so desperately to crack terrible jokes at us. Of course, he always thought it was funny, while no one else did. No one likes the guy who tries so hard to be funny but only ends up sucking out the air of the room. After we had taken over the TPK ship, only 3 of their original bad guy crew were left. The original captain, who was drunk, and now demoted, an insane dwarf, and a human lady who was quiet and liked tea. Clearly she was the only one we could rely on while the rest of the party went to shore. Captain Hindsight and myself went to her to have a chat before we disembarked. Captain Hindsight told her, "While we are away, the former captain is technically in charge, but we trust you more. Make sure to keep an eye on the rest of them." Once he finished saying that, I was going to tell her that she will have the unofficial title of bosun and the pay that goes with it. As soon as I said the words, "We trust you more," Warlock loudly shouts,
"He just said that. Why are you repeating what he said? Are you a parrot? I don't see any feathers on you. I know we are pirates, but we're not parrots."
I was trying so hard to keep my composure with him yelling over me. There's nothing that I hate more than someone loudly talking over others trying to interrupt. On top of that, it wasn't even close to funny. No one laughed except him, and everyone else was just annoyed. Once he shut up, DM asked me what I was trying to say, and I replied, never mind. It's not important. I could tell the DM was getting really pissed at him. I really wanted to leave after that, but I sucked it up and continued. Why? It's also worse because this is in the disgusting, crazy, awful neckbeard nest. Anyway, you might be wondering why I haven't really brought up Rogue that much, and honestly, he didn't do much at all. He would only participate whenever there was a battle or to throw out a random suggestion. I could tell he was really nervous in front of new people, which is understandable. DM kept throwing him opportunities to roleplay and never really got into them. Considering that he is friends with Sorcerer, it leads me to believe that this is just the way he is, or that he has probably been browbeaten by Sorcerer so many times that he's scared of doing anything for fear of being judged. Also reminds me of a story that Warlock told me one day when we weren't playing. Before I joined, Wizard and Warlock remember talking to the rest of their group the first day they met. Sorcerer told them he's joined quite a few D&D groups through Facebook, and none of them lasted very long. This may sound a bit conspiratorial, but after getting to know him a bit more, I think Sorcerer is just a toxic narcissist. Someone that either alienates people who have the sense to avoid someone like him, or he lures more insecure people into a harmful friendship. I've been in an abusive relationship, and I know what it looks like. It could all be just a guess, and maybe it's not true, but I can't forget how he would just switch back and forth between being nice and so mean, so abruptly. One session, he gave me one of his extra foldable dice trays to keep, then 5 minutes later, berates me for only using Healing Word and not Cure Wounds on him. I'll never forget the last session we had with him. Man, what a shit show. We were tasked to go into a haunted marsh north of Saltmarsh, and the council told us that there was some sort of evil that was emanating forth and wanted us to find it and destroy it, if possible. Sorcerer grabs a horse and cart since it takes a while to get there. Myself and the rest of the party prepare to leave the ship for a few days. We tell the crew to behave while we are gone, and the crazy dwarf tells me to sod off. I told him not to disrespect his superiors, and he challenged me to a fight. Just myself and the DM roll initiative, and myself, not wanting to waste time, decided to cast command on him. He fails, and I tell him to swim, at which point he jumps off the ship into the water and swims out of the harbor like a crazy person. I thought it was a clever way to avoid unnecessary combat. Well, Sorcerer just says, "Good job, you wasted a spell slot. You know that this place we're going to is haunted, right?" I don't even respond. My patience for him is gone by this point. Eventually, we make it to this haunted swamp and find out that it is infested with these cursed spores. After a fight with a few cursed trees, we came upon a clearing with some charred bones. We heard a legend that long ago a witch was taken here by the citizens of Saltmarsh and burned alive. Sorcerer the entire time tells us not to investigate the clearing and that we will either die or be cursed if we stay here. We don't listen, and upon further investigation, we find that these bones belong to a little girl. It's pretty obvious the villagers killed an innocent child and used her as a scapegoat for whatever woes they were having, like Salem. Being a righteous cleric, I cannot abide this travesty and begin digging a grave. All I hear is Sorcerer telling me what a stupid idea this is, and we might as well just kill ourselves and get it over with. I perform burial rites for the young girl, and the DM tells me, "You sense a ghostly hand upon your cheek and get the feeling of a soul finding peace. The turmoil that enveloped the clearing seems to have passed." By this point, it should seem obvious that we are flat out ignoring any of the dumb advice Sorcerer gives. With it getting late and the clearing sort of safe, we decide to take a long rest. After we wake, Wizard checks the swamp to see if it is still infested with those cursed spores. We then realize that the ghost was not the source of the curse, and of course, Wizard has to loudly complain that I wasted everyone's time. Further into the swamp, we locate a small shack that is covered in moss, vines, and spores. I cast Detect Magic and find out that there is some vile magical energy coming from inside. We go in only to be ambushed by a black pudding. After 2 rounds, I get a crit from black pudding and fall to 0 hit points. Now, I like to immerse myself in the characters I play, and of course, that means I can get attached to them. I think everyone knows how tense and frightening it can be when your character goes unconscious, so when Sorcerer wants to laugh at me for almost dying, it can be especially nerve-wracking.
Hey, you should see your face right now. You're as pale as a ghost. Let's see if you die.
He tells me, "Dude, I'm a heavily armored frontline cleric. I'm the party's main aggro puller, and you're going to mock me for getting a beating while you dick around the back ranks?" Missed opportunity to roast him for throwing knives instead of cantrips, but alright. Fortunately, Wizard is nice enough to give me a nice healing word, and we end up killing the black ooze. I cast Detect Magic again to see where the source is, which leads us to a bed that's a corpse with growing fungus out of it. DM says, out of the chest of this corpse there is a large fungal growth with spores all around it. The energy seems to be coming from the body. Sorcerer chimes in, it's a trick. There's a trapdoor underneath the bed. That's where the magic is coming from. There is so much I could continue complaining about, but this story is already long enough. I decide to pull out my dagger and cut around the fungal growth and yank it out. A cloud of spores burst out, and I pass the con save, and find the source of the curse inside his body. A cursed ring of 3 wishes, with only 1 wish left. Cue the usual, yup, that's my ring now, from Sorcerer, but I decide to hold on to it myself. After all, I found it, why should I give it to him? Plus, it's cursed. If we are going to give it to someone, it definitely wouldn't be him. We leave the swamp, deciding what we should do with the ring. Warlock says if we find a powerful enough cleric, we might be able to have them cast Remove Curse on it. Maybe if we give it to the council, then they will take it in exchange for some nice magic items from all of us. Not sure what to do exactly, we see there is a small village on the outskirts of the swamp. I stop there to tell the villagers that the curse has been lifted and to gather any information. Sorcerer is still being a scaredy cat, not wanting to confront anyone or anything of mystery. He's afraid that a bunch of peasants and farmers will try to kill us if they know we have the ring. Even if we stopped the curse, myself and Warlock ask them if they've ever seen this ring, at which point, I kid you not, Sorcerer just shakes his head, looks at us and just says, "You're both dumbasses." That right there, that was the breaking point for me. This guy's done everything under the sun that will qualify him for the worst D&D Player of the Year award. Well, I mean, not everything. But this, openly insulting everyone to their face for doing something you don't like in a fantasy game. Seeing that things are getting tense, DM ends the session there. On our way out, Sorcerer shrugs it off and says, "Hey man, nothing personal. I just wouldn't play your character the same way." I nod and say, "Don't worry about it." On the ride back, I am just ranting about what just happened. At this point, Warlock and I are done. Both agree to text the DM in the morning, telling him that we either won't be playing with Sorcerer or we won't be playing at all. Turns out that the DM had called up Warlock shortly after he dropped me off. They had a long conversation about that night's session, and he had already decided to cut Sorcerer and Rogue out of the campaign. At this point, everyone was just miserable being around him. DM already had a talk with him about behavior, and it was clear he wasn't going to change. It sucked that Rogue had to go too. But he was friends with Sorcerer, so it seemed like a package deal. Plus, he didn't do anything outside combat, so not much of a loss there. I do still feel real bad about cutting him, though. It's clear he doesn't have many friends, and the only friend of his we know is a toxic douchebag, but it's okay, because we never saw Sorcerer again. So that's my story. Sorry if it is so long, but I had a lot I wanted to get off my chest. Even with everything that's happened, these were a few silver linings to the story. We made a new friend, the DM, whose campaign we are still playing in. We found a replacement, a new swashbuckler rogue, who's also a cool guy, and not a prick. And now we play over at Wizard's Place, which is much more clean and inviting, not to mention only 10 minutes from my house. Moral of the story, cut out toxic people in your life. I used to think people can change, and to some degree, they can, but people who act like this are doing it to fulfill some sort of emptiness inside themselves. Cut out that fungal growth, and never look back. TLDR, met some new D&D players. One of them was a toxic douche who sucked at the game, told everyone how to play their own characters, wanted all weapons and items we found regardless if he could use them, thought he was funny but instead was really cringy, told us to avoid any danger or mysteries, and flat out insulted us to our faces for not doing what he would have done. Always communicate with people if you think that they are being a problem player, which the DM did, but the OP of the story doesn't really go into detail about a personal talk with the sorcerer. I don't know how well it would have gone given their narcissistic behavior, probably quite poorly. But yeah, talking to the DM is a perfectly valid way to do it as well, as long as the DM is comfortable with that. This is the ultimate example of letting it fester. Letting problems build up until they can no longer be handled. Now, of course, I don't know if the sorcerer would be willing to take criticism, and based on their behavior, probably not. Based on the fact that the DM talked to them, yeah, probably not. But I think that this campaign could have gone better if this issue was handled earlier, which the OP does recognize. It's not really main character syndrome in the sense that the character wants to be the main character. It's more like the player behind him wants to control everything. It's like backseat playing, exactly like the OP said. The player views some sort of superiority while he's playing the game. He's telling other people how they should play. And if they don't play his way, well, they may as well not play at all, which is a horrible mentality to have. It's honestly one of the most irritating things you could do in Dungeons and Dragons. It can absolutely ruin the game for a player if you're constantly correcting and judging them for everything they do in their game. Obviously, advice is great, but at the end of the day, this is Dungeons and Dragons. We're not playing a competitive speed run here. We're trying to have fun, and it's not fun getting criticized and judged for every decision you make. It just makes the game stressful. I'm glad that OP managed to find a new player and continue the game with the same DM and his friend. That's really good, and a happy ending that we don't see all the time on this channel. If you guys enjoyed it, then please do leave a like on this episode of RPG Horror Stories. If you want to see more of my content, then please do subscribe to Crispy's Tavern. We do D&D advice as well as a podcast where I interview other D&D creators. You can check it out on my channel. Please do subscribe to see more of that content. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment backseat D&D to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.